Overwhelming.
Motivated.
Worried.
Anticipation.
Outraged.
Worry.
Fearful.
Nervous. Powerless.
Responsibility.
Brightening.
Hopeful.
Impatient.
Terrified.
Hope.
Devastating.
Fearful.
Passionate.
Exasperated.
Outraged.
Chaotic.
Concerned.
Disappointed.
Eager to take action.
Hello there and welcome to an introduction to the Youth Climate Summit, which is going to start next week. My name's Rachel Musson. I'm a teacher and I'm also director of an organisation called ThoughtBox. And I'm here today to introduce the big picture of climate change. I've invited two friends, Dr Emily Grossman and Andy Cameron, to also come and help talk about the science and the emotions of climate change. Now, we've all heard about climate change and biodiversity loss, but what does it mean for us, and what does it mean for the world around us? A little bit like the pandemic that we're living in at the moment, these issues are happening to people all over the world, and it's affecting and will affect all of us at some point. And just like the virus, it's sometimes hard to see how these effects are happening every day, but also, like the virus, we can start to see some of the long-term problems of climate change and biodiversity loss, and the effects can help us to understand a little bit more why this is such an urgent issue. The good news is there's millions of people all over the world who are already doing a great deal to support the crisis, but there is a lot more that all of us can do, and we're going to be thinking a little bit more today about what those things are. But part of the role for introducing the Youth Climate Summit is for us to understand a little bit more about the science of climate change and biodiversity loss, and also to collect to the emotions, because they're just as important when we're thinking about how we respond to these issues around us. So I'm going to start off by asking Emily a question, and really just thinking about the fact that many of us know about and are talking about climate change and biodiversity loss, but why is it such a big deal?
Well, the thing is that climate change affects everything, as does biodiversity loss. And you might have heard that our climate, our temperatures are currently just about 1 degree hotter than they were 150 years ago at the start of the Industrial Revolution. Now, 1 degree may not sound like much, but 1 degree is the equivalent of 5 atomic bombs of heat going off in our atmosphere every second. That's all that extra heat being added to the atmosphere. And what that heat does is, of course, it raises the temperature, and that makes it more likely that there's going to be heat waves and prolonged periods of heating. So basically, hotter areas and drier areas get hotter and drier. So you're going to get more floods, you're going to get more forest fires, you're going to get more droughts, sorry, not floods if it's drier. You're going to get more forest fires, and you're going to get increased water shortages in areas where it's already hot and dry. And you're going to have people suffering from the impacts of hot, dry temperatures. But in addition, the extra heat in our atmosphere causes evaporation from oceans, and that causes more water vapor in the atmosphere, and that causes more clouds in areas that are already wet and damp. So drier areas get drier, and wetter areas tend to get wetter. And in addition, there's a change to our climate system, what's called the jet stream, which means that these hotter or drier or wetter and colder spells linger for longer. So you get huge dumps of rain lasting for prolonged periods of time. So you get floods and freak storms in some areas, and you get prolonged intense heat waves or extreme hot weather events in other areas. And the thing is, not only does that impact how we feel and how we are, but it also impacts hugely the ability of our planet to grow crops. And of course, crops are what feed us. And then if we add into that, so we've got droughts causing damage to the soil, so you can't grow crops. You've also got floods making it harder to grow crops in other areas. And then if we add into that the fact that due to intensive agriculture, so what humans are doing to the planet through ploughing up the fields, that's also damaging our soil. So then it becomes harder to grow the crops that are going to be needed to feed us in the future. Plus, we've got the fact that this extra heat is causing expansion of the water in the oceans. So that causes rises in sea levels and, of course, melting of the ice caps. And altogether, that means those rises in sea levels not only mean that there's going to be more floods and more people having to move out of areas because they're underwater, but also that impacts our ability to be able to get fresh water, because a lot of people across the globe, billions of people across the globe, rely on glaciers, for example, melting water from glaciers as their fresh water supplies. 1.9 billion people actually rely on glaciers. So as ice melts, as sea levels rise, we're going to see knock-on impacts in terms of how we can feed ourselves, not just in remote parts of the globe, which are perhaps more impacted by extreme weather at the moment, but of course, those crops are imported to countries like the UK and like other countries. So we will see the impacts in our own countries. And then, of course, we've got biodiversity loss, which feeds into all of this as well, because to grow crops, we rely particularly, for example, on insects. Insects pollinate crops, and with a loss of insects to pollinate the crops, and also a loss of things like earthworms, which help to replenish soils, then we're inevitably, unless we take action, which we can still do, going to see a decline in the ability to grow crops. And also there are other creatures that we rely on for our own health. It's not just about creatures being beautiful and lovely to look at, and of course they've got just as much rights to be on this planet as we do, but as we lose our creatures due to climate change, due to changes in land use, due to damage of the habitats of creatures, such as by chopping down forests, as we lose those creatures, we lose things like whales, which are really important for churning up the nutrients in the oceans so that plankton can grow, which are the bottom of the food chain in the oceans. We're losing corals, which provide protection from storms and actually help the livelihoods of 1 billion people and are the bottom of the food chain for millions of other creatures in the oceans. And we also lose things like forest elephants, which are really helpful for cutting down trees in forests, smaller shrubs, so that the bigger trees can grow, which can then absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, which helps to balance the planet. So those are just a few examples, but we are very dependent on the creatures around us. We also depend on trees to help us protect us from floods and storms. So there's huge interwoven impacts of changing our climate, changing our biodiversity, and damaging our soils, all of which humans are having a pretty devastating impact on right now.
Thanks, Emily. And actually just hearing all of these facts and figures and understanding the complexity of what's happening can feel really overwhelming. And actually, I feel a lot of us are really starting to feel the impact of these issues around us on our own mental and emotional health. And I wonder, Andy, if you could talk to us a little bit about some of the impacts that climate change might be having on our mental health and some of the things that we can do to respond to that.
Yeah, I think everything that Dr Emily Grossman said then resonates with a lot of people. However, young people are very exposed to climate change, but sometimes they don't really understand everything about climate change. And I think it can be all over the TV, it can be all over social media, it can be all over the internet. And to be exposed to something and to be afraid of that thing, I think it sort of goes hand in hand with education. Young people need to be educated about climate change and about all these things that are happening, because it's real, it's happening, and we shouldn't be afraid about it, because we can still impact change. Now, with regards to emotions, all the emotions that young people are feeling, they are natural and normal emotions. Whether we're scared, we're afraid, we feel a bit anxious, they are normal emotions that I feel, that you will feel, and everybody feels, and that's okay. What's not okay is to not talk about how you are feeling. Now, if we can start to talk about climate change much more openly, talk about how that makes us feel, talk about things that are happening in our lives, and start to understand things in other people's lives around us, that can play a really important part in developing a young person's mental health.
Thanks, Andy. And I think it's really important what you're saying there, the importance of talking about climate change. As you said, this is not something that's going anywhere, and it's a really important part of our lives that all of us are actually having open conversations about it. And I know as a teacher, sometimes it can feel quite tricky to know what to talk to young people about and how much to share. But I think it does a disservice to the young people around us and to you guys for us to not be honest and open about this. But again, as Andy's just said, what's important to recognise is that all of us, whether we're young or old, are feeling these feelings, and that's okay, and actually talking about them is a really important step. But when we're learning about some of the different effects of climate change and biodiversity loss, it can feel incredibly overwhelming, and often we can feel quite anxious or maybe disempowered because it just feels such a huge issue. And Andy, I think in the work that you're doing with Healthy Minds UK, you're really helping young people to look for some of the signs of what's being called eco-anxiety, so that we can help each other and step into this space more kind of caringly. So would you just tell us a little bit about how to look for the signs of eco-anxiety and what we can do to support this? Yeah, eco-anxiety is sort of a new thing that's happening. And it's the constant worry and fear about the world changing. Now, you can have a lot of feelings of things that are irrational. And I think that's important to speak to children and young people about these things. Sort of the feeling as the world's going to end if I don't do such and such a thing. And that's not the case. It's about putting things into perspective and recognising that maybe you're not sleeping very well, you might be having bad dreams about these things, you might get really angry and frustrated, and you might feel really helpless with what you're doing or with what other people around you are doing. Now, if we start to recognise them things in our lives, it's very important to then speak about it, as I mentioned prior, in order to then get that off your chest. And what I always say is if we've got a bottle full of our worries and we let that fill up, it will explode at some point. And that explosion is what can cause you to be really, really ill. Thanks, Andy. And that's really good advice as well, just to think about that image of the exploding bottle and actually just recognising that we're all in this, so we're all feeling the same feelings and we can sort of really help to support each other. So as well as sort of thinking about the emotions of climate change, Emily, how can we help young people to sort of really think about the facts? Because I know you've recently teamed up with a group of scientists to really look at the science of climate change and biodiversity loss. And we often hear a lot about the idea of trust the science. So what can young people do to help them to learn the facts of climate change and know where to go to look for these sort of truths, if you like?
Well, yeah, that's something that's been a theme that's very close to my heart, because as a science communicator and as a science author, when I first learned about what was really going on the planet, I was quite horrified, and I experienced a lot of the feelings that Andy has described, moments of anger and frustration, also moments of intense anxiety, overwhelm, paralysis. And what I decided to do is to take the action that was aligned with my skills and my passions and what I felt I could do to help was to sort of really try and bring together all of that information, team up, as you said, with a load of scientists from the XR scientists, Extinction Rebellion scientists community, and create a sort of one-stop guide, on a free online guide to with a really easy to read, accessible, well-referenced document to where you can find out everything that you want to know about what's going on the planet, how it's happened, how we know it's true, arguments to deal with the things you might have heard from skeptics who say, oh no, it's just the Earth's natural cycles, or it's not really human caused, which none of that's true. But how to actually empower yourself to find out the information and to be able to then use those arguments to empower yourself to take action and to speak to others. So what we created, and there's been my personal way of empowering myself to the action that I've been able to take, is to share that information with others. So we've created this online guide called Emergency on Planet Earth, which is very, it's got a very easy to read contents page where you can scan through, you don't have to read the whole thing all in one go, and look for the question that you want to know about what's going on the planet, whether it's like, what are the governments doing or not doing, whether it's about what's going to happen in 2050, whether it's about what's going on right now in our oceans, or what's going on right now with biodiversity and wildlife loss. So, I'd really recommend that whether you're a student yourself, whether you're a teacher, or whether it's something that you want to share with your friends and family, I would really recommend having a look at that guide. It's available as a Google document, and it's also available on the Extinction Rebellion website under the emergency, the truth, that I'm sure we can link to it as part of this video. And yeah, that's your sort of one-stop shop for finding out all you need to know. And like I said, I think it's a great example as well of, like, because the empowerment and the relief that I now feel, like, I'm still scared about what's going on the planet, but having taken my form of action, for some people it might be, you know, joining a campaign. For other people it might be doing something in your local school, or for others it might be just talking to your friends and family. For me, I'm a communicator. That's my pathway into taking action. And not only is that helpful for the planet to read something like that and to find out the information, but also that helps me to feel more empowered, such that I can then work out what my next move is to make a difference. And I think what Andy said is really important. It's about finding ways to kind of release that anxiety, to release that fear, that anger, that frustration, whatever it may be, through empowerment. And a lot of that, I believe, is through information, getting a real sense of what's true, what's real, what the facts are, and then being able to take action from there.
Thanks, Amy. That's really helpful, and also really introduces what this whole week is about next week, which is the importance of learning what's happening for us to then understand what actions we can take. And I just wonder, Andy, if you wouldn't mind finishing, just talking a little bit about the future. Now, it's quite hard for us to sort of look to the future and know what the world is going to look like, but what can we do to sort of help understand how change can happen, thinking about our own past maybe, and what changes happen in our own lifetimes?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I always start off as to when I was a young person. When I was a young person, I speak to, when I educate young people, I always tell them, you know, the seasons were very sort of rigid. Everything was sunny and warm in summer. Winter was very cold and snowy. And now, 30 odd years later, all the weather sometimes changes across seasons. And that's changed in my lifetime. And I think in another 30 years, I think that change is going to continue unless we take action, unless we come together collaboratively and do the things that we can control. We can only control certain things, and that's okay. If we start to use what we can control and do positive things with that, I think that could be a real benefit, not only to ourselves and the people around us, but to the planet, to our local community, and to the whole environment in general.
Thanks, Andy. And also, we've already sort of seen how much can change if we take action. We've seen the impact of the ozone layer. We've all stood up, we took action, and change has completely happened, and we've reversed effects. So it's really important to think positively as well about how much can happen if we put our mind to it. And so next week, you're going to have a huge amount of opportunities in your classes and at home to explore a wide range of ideas to learn more about climate change and biodiversity loss. You've got Monday all about nature, oceans and water, Tuesday travel, pollution and waste, Wednesday food farming and forests, Thursday fashion and consumption, and Friday is on a sustainable future. And there'll be chances for you to learn and share and think about what you can do and change in your own lives to move from spaces of anxiety to spaces of empowerment. So thank you so much, Dr. Emily Grossman and Andy Cameron, for being with us this morning, and we really look forward to all of you connecting with these activities next week and hearing how you get on.